Welcome to the Holmlands Adventure Podcast. Storytelling inspired by adventure.
So, welcome to the Holmlands Adventure Podcast. I'm your host, Cameron Hall. I'm delighted to be joined today by serial adventurer and real-life Wonder Woman, Lindsey Cole. I'm delighted to call a friend as well. How are you doing, Lindsey?
I'm good, thank you. How are you, Cameron?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Very well. Thanks for coming on the show. Pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So, you've accomplished a lot of incredible adventures, from cycling from Cairo to Cape Town for the World Cup in South Africa, roller skating to Paris, and running to Manchester with a ukulele. Lots of things that we'll get into. But I'm quite curious to know where it all started for you. I know we actually met in Canada many moons ago on a ski season. Was it that working kind of traveling thing that started off the taste for adventure, or how did you first get the bug?
No, I wasn't. I've always been very impulsive, and I was always very sporty but not competitive. I didn't really care about the competitive side. And I grew up with my duvet cover was an atlas of the world. So I always was fascinated with the world, and we never really went on holidays further than the Canary Islands or Spain. So I always wanted to go further afield. And then when I graduated from uni, that's when I did a ski season in Canada and Austria and a volunteer project in Sri Lanka. And then I went to Australia and wanted to circumnavigate with this van that I had. And then my dad passed away suddenly. Now I was catapulted back to my old life at home, really depressed. And to deal with my grief, I one day I had an epiphany. I was like, I need to kind of channel this energy into something else. So I did a triathlon, hadn't ridden a bike for ages, and I was really proud of myself. And so then I cycled the length of Britain. Again, I was really proud of myself for getting to the end. So it became quite addictive, and I became more aware of my own capabilities when I just tried something I didn't think I'd be good at, and it just grew from there.
So when your dad passed away, that was quite sudden, and you were traveling at the time, right?
Yeah.
And where were you when you heard that news, and how did that information come to you?
I was so I wanted to stay. I wanted to live in Australia, actually. And to get your second year visa, you have to do seasonal work, fruit picking. So I was on a banana farm, and I went to get the bus at like just 10 to 6 or something. So I called home, actually, and I had got my dad, and then I asked to speak to mum, as I normally did. And then I organised a call because she was out for when I got back from work. So I went to the banana farm, picked bananas, rolled bananas. My job was I stood by a conveyor belt, making sure all the bananas faced the right direction. And then I got back from the farm and I had a call from mum, and he died in between. So I was riddled with guilt for having asked to speak to mum when he answered the phone.
And so you're back home. I guess that you're out in Australia. You say you're wanting to live there. That's, I suppose, in air quotes, kind of living the dream. And then your world comes crashing down, and you're back home. What was that reality like? Your new reality like when you're suddenly kind of taken away from this big trip and this big adventure that you're on, and all of a sudden you're back home with your mum dealing with a bereavement.
Yeah, well, just confusing really, because I didn't want to leave her, and I was 24, which doesn't sound that old, but it is. Sorry, it doesn't sound that young, but it is. It's a weird transitional time because you've just finished uni. You're still a bit of a kid, but you're not quite a kid. So I suppressed all my emotions because I didn't think I was entitled to be upset or cry. So I kind of confused myself, and all my friends had moved on and were climbing their career ladders, and I was quite lonely, and I just didn't really know what to do. So yeah, it was a very odd time.
So that, I guess, that energy that you had, maybe negative energy that was there from the bereavement, that took you into doing the London Triathlon as a means to kind of expel that energy, or to deal with it.
It gave me a focus, so I needed something to focus on. So I found it quite helpful having to. I got a job as a PA, which I didn't want to do anyway. I'm not organised, and I was going into London every day from outside London. And beforehand, I would just come back home, slump on the couch, feel sorry for myself. Whereas once I signed up to do the triathlon, I had a focus and would go for a cycle, go for a run, go swimming, and it really helped.
And what was it about the triathlon specifically? Had you had experience with kind of swimming, running, cycling in the past, or was it, a friend recommended for you to do it? Why did you choose that particular event, and why was that, perhaps a focal point for you specifically?
I grew up as a swimmer, as a competitive swimmer, but I wasn't competitive. So I've always been a good pool swimmer. And I went to Loughborough Uni, where I was offered all these opportunities to try all sorts of new sports. And I always wanted to get into triathlon, but I fancied the drink more than the sport. So I never really did it. So I just always wanted to give it a go. So I just thought, I'll give it a go now.
And so that moment when you're crossing the finishing line, you've completed the triathlon, which I assume you did complete. How did that make you feel? What was your kind of sense of feeling after, you put all this energy and focus into completing an event, you've crossed the finishing line, and then what was that sense of feeling like internally? Were you satisfied? Did you feel kind of relieved, or did you feel maybe empty again because that challenge had been kind of completed and was now over?
No, I was actually really scared about the cycle, because the cycle was 40 kilometres, which obviously doesn't sound a lot to me now. But at the time, I had never cycled more than a mile, really, before training for it. And so I was really nervous about that. And then when I was able to do it, I was really proud of my cycling capabilities. And a month later, there was an organised fundraiser for the British Heart Foundation, and my dad died of a heart attack. So to cycle to Paris. So I wanted to do that, and I none of my friends wanted to do it. So I looked on Facebook. This is where Facebook can be helpful. And I saw two guys that I sort of knew, who were acquaintances, friends of friends, or I went to uni with, but one guy was 5 years above me. So I just asked them if they'd be interested, and they both were. And they became quite like brothers and are really good friends now. And it was really humbling, and that there's a whole world out there of activities to do other than sitting on the couch or going to the pub.
So from within doing the triathlon, doing that cycle, and I guess maybe having that psychological barrier of like 40 kilometers, that's a really long way. Did you come out of that with that sense of, wow, I've just cycled 40 kilometers and maybe cycling's now something that I can do more of, and you kind of latch towards cycling as a specific sort of new challenge?
Yeah, well, I suppose it's the same concept for many things I've done. So I've done Ironman, and before I did 40 kilometers, I was scared of not being able to do it. And then I did it. I was like, oh, that wasn't that bad. And then to Paris, it was 300 miles, so 100 miles a day. And I thought, oh God, that's a big step up. But then I did it. And then the Ironman is, I did a half first, but then the Ironman is, I think it's 118 miles or 120 miles. Within a triathlon. So I thought, oh God, how will I be able to do that? And then when you do it, you're like, oh, I think it's a sense of achievement when you don't think you're capable of something. It's quite rewarding.
And I've heard you mention sort of in previous interviews that you've always felt sort of average at things, not maybe the sportiest, not maybe the fastest, the quickest, but that kind of self-acknowledgement that feeling average is not necessarily a bad thing. It just gives you an even greater sense of accomplishment and pride when you do complete something. And it's almost wanting to have that feeling again and kind of rewarding yourself, I suppose, with that feeling of accomplishment and achievement. Is that something which has propelled you from adventure to adventure?
I think it's more curiosity. So if you know you're capable of doing something smaller, then you wonder. So I wanted to cycle the length of Africa, and I knew that I could give it a go because I'd done the warm-up by cycling to Paris and the length of Britain. And then I wanted to explore. It's exploring and curiosity more, really. And then I think the excitement is not knowing if you are going to be able to do it, but giving it a go is exciting and nerve-wracking because you're not sure, but you know that you could be capable.
So I guess that leads on to the Cairo to Cape Town challenge to cycle to the World Cup in South Africa.
Uh-huh.
Now, an anecdote for you, but I was in Tanzania in 2012, climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, and obviously you've got Sherpas who are helping to carry your equipment, and you join in conversation with them. And these two guys started talking to me about how they had tried to cycle from Tanzania to Cape Town for the World Cup 2 years beforehand. And I said, I've got a friend in the UK. She cycled down from Cairo to Cape Town, and they pretty much stopped in their tracks, dropped all the bags, and just looked at me with like, no, that didn't happen. I was like, no, my friend Lindsey. And they were completely astonished because they didn't even make it out of Tanzania to be able to get there. They found it too tough, too challenging. So how do you prepare for cycling the length of a continent? And what was that journey like?
It was wonderful, difficult. So my friends family didn't want me to go on my own. So I advertised in the metro to find a team, and I found a team. I interviewed tons of people, gave them the questionnaire, and then picked a team. It was 3 guys. I actually wanted a girl to come, but she pulled out last minute. So we had a situation with team dynamics. We didn't gel. That is okay. I'm good friends with one of them now, but I don't know. It's just story of team dynamics, isn't it? And I actually designed an itinerary for us to ensure that we knew where we were going to be every day. But it's pretty hard to do for 5 months. And part of the adventure is the unknown. So wild camping, where you might find a beautiful spot and want to pull up there. I was actually a bit nervous about the wild camping because you assume Africa might be quite corrupt or dangerous, but it's not at all. It was remarkable, and the people were really friendly and just want to help you. Maybe a bit too friendly, want to help you a bit too much. But yeah, it was really, really good. The biggest challenge was team dynamics, actually.
And so, do you have a support vehicle with you as well, or are you just bikepacking?
No, just bikepacking.
And when you talk about wild camping, is that every night, or are you kind of mixing it up with staying in hostels and kind of maybe?
No, for the first 2 countries, it was wild camping every night. Apart from if we're in a city, obviously, like Khartoum in Sudan and Cairo in Egypt. But when we got to Ethiopia, it was a bit more sketchy because kids throw stones at Westerners. I'd heard about it before, but I didn't quite believe it. But then when you experience it, you're like, wow, this actually happens. And it's okay, it's harmless, but it's just more built up. So you want to be wise and responsible, really. You don't really want to attract bother, and it's not really fair for them if you've got these flashy kind of bikes that can scale a continent out by your tent. So we stayed in bedsits past Ethiopia. And
what kind of bikes are you on? Are you on road bikes or touring bikes? And
touring bikes.
Panniers on?
Panniers, yeah.
And
so bike packing's relatively new. Back then it was, well, actually you couldn't really, bike packing's for speed. If you want to tour and take some, not luxuries, but a few more possessions, then panniers are better because you can take more.
And so how long is that journey? How long is the, in terms of time, and did you give yourself to be able to get from Cairo to Cape Town?
Well, we needed to get there for the World Cup. So we left in the beginning of February, and I think it started in beginning of June, England's first game in Rustenburg. And I wanted to cycle every mile, but then by the time we're meeting more people doing similar journeys, like hitchhiking or getting a bus or something, or driving in Landies. And then we're discovering more beautiful places. So we sort of started extending our time in spots. So sometimes we'd have to hop on a bus and catch up. But actually that was just as much of an adventure in itself, because the bus was full of chickens and goats and people moving house with sofas attached to the bus, and everyone would want to help us strap our bikes down. And it was quite something. And sometimes you had to wait a whole day for a bus.
And I imagine with those team dynamics that you talk about, you're not just cycling with these people, you're effectively living with them, I guess, 24 hours a day.
Yeah, there was no reprieve really. It was, it was, I think it's probably when people don't know each other, you can't say, come on now, shut up, or time out. It's more you think you can take it. It was a lot of banter and it was aimed at me, which I can handle. But after, day in, day out, cycling 8 hours a day, you're like, come on.
Did that take you out of the experience of, you're cycling through all these incredible countries, and I imagine meeting some amazing people and, experiencing kind of the highs and the lows that go with any kind of adventure. But did it take away from the experience because you necessarily weren't enjoying the company of the people that you were sharing the experience with? Yeah,
for sure. Well, I suppose everyone has something different they want to get out of something. I did a master's in journalism beforehand, so I wanted to do it to get experience in the field, to writing or field experience. And so I would stop a lot more and want to take photos. And some guys, one guy would just want to like pelt and cycle how fast he wanted to go, which is absolutely fine. But if you have different agendas, then it's going to crash. And I'm just a slower person. Even walking down the street, I wander and look in windows, and that's how I like to travel. So I kind of like going on my own now, because I like saying hello to any interesting person and hearing their story. That's all part of it for me.
You say, it's going to crash. Speaking of crashes, did you have any big crashes on the way through? You must have had some incidents on the bike, I would have thought, traveling that length of a distance.
Yeah, I did. We were at the Blue Nile Gorge at the top of it, and we had to descend down. It was sort of like a 30-kilometer descent, I think. And my hands turned into claws because they were braking so hard, and I was still going 20 plus miles an hour. I couldn't go any slower. And I could smell the rubber burning. And then hairpin after hairpin after hairpin, I was actually getting a bit scared. And then I saw a truck coming uphill, and there was loads of gravel in between me and the truck. And I don't know, I kept having these flashes that we would collide. So I threw myself into the cliff to control the crash, so I wouldn't go into him or slip under his wheels. And then I didn't have a helmet on, so my head split open. But it's quite remarkable. I was out for maybe a few seconds, and then I was surrounded by people and chickens, and they threw me onto a bus which was just passing by, and I was in hospital in Addis Ababa hours later, which was great because I also missed having to do the ascent on the other side.
So it's strategic in many ways.
Yeah.
And hopefully you will start wearing a helmet after this.
Yeah, of course.
And so this might sound like an obvious question, but did you have any tickets for the World Cup?
No, I tried to blag them, which was a lot harder to do. And then we managed to get tickets to 2 games. I can't actually tell you how I did it now. One, I think I might have written to the FA, and they might have given us like discounted for our effort. And one, I think I met a guy in a bar who worked for football and gave me 2 tickets.
And so you managed to get to the England games themselves?
Yeah, which is quite unfortunate because they weren't very good.
I was going to say, all that hard work, all that pedaling, and it wasn't the most successful of tournaments for the country, was it?
No, it was awful. It was really bad, yeah.
And so at the end of that journey, is it a case of, you jump on a plane, you're taking your bike with you, if you leave it there, and then you're back home, and then you're back to the real world again?
Yeah, I was going to, so it took us 5 months to get to South Africa, to Cape Town. And I had a conundrum because I was like, it took me 5 months to get here. I want to spend some time here, but it was actually really cold. And I'd also contracted a disease called cellulitis, maybe just during the football tournament. So in South Africa, my leg ballooned, and you can actually die from it, apparently. So my leg was twice the size of my right leg was twice the size of my left leg. And then I managed to get to a doctor in time. I was on some, antibiotics, but it really knocked me out for quite a while. And then I was still cycling, made it to Cape Town. So I thought I made a decision to maybe come back, enjoy Cape Town properly. I was exhausted mentally and physically. It was a really incredible adventure, but there was highs and lows.
Because there's an element to you're working your way to a destination. So when you reach that destination, you're at the games, is that the end? Or is it a case of, well, now that I'm here and I've worked so hard to get here, that you actually want to spend more time because you've worked so hard to be there in that environment?
Well, the first game was in Rustenburg, and then we had a month to get to Cape Town. So I had a month in South Africa. I mean, Cape Town's a stunning town, but I just thought I didn't have the money, I didn't have the resources, and I think I spent 3 days there. So I went home, surprised my mum. I didn't tell her I was coming home, and it was her birthday.
Oh, what a wonderful surprise! I'm sure she'd love you.
Yeah,
Chuffed to bits to have seen you.
Yeah, that I survived.
And coming back to the kind of the family side of things, so obviously with your father passing away, and then all of a sudden you've obviously been traveling before your dad passed, but then you're going on these incredible kind of crazy adventures. And how does your mum feel about, when you say, "Hi mum, so this time I'm going to," what's her reaction like when you tell her about kind of the next idea that you've got?
Yeah, she doesn't really, I don't often tell her actually. I often start doing it and then tell her. She doesn't really like it. The walking a rabbit-proof fence, she didn't like it at all. The Africa thing, I think she was okay because I had people coming with me, and I'd done a lot of research, and she'd seen me doing the research. But when I mermaided the Thames, she quite enjoyed it because she was able to come and watch and walk alongside. But I think she came along 6, 7, or 8 times out of the 22 days.
And on the rabbit-proof fence, we had the pleasure to sit down with you about 18 months or so ago to talk about your journey walking the rabbit-proof fence. But for those people perhaps watching and listening that aren't aware of what the rabbit-proof fence is, and before we perhaps talk about that a little bit more, could you maybe just explain a little bit about the fence and your connection with it?
Yeah, so the rabbit-proof fence is a fence that runs from north to south of Western Australia. It was erected to keep rabbits out of pastoral Australia farmland when we moved over and bought rabbits for hunting parties, and they populated the land. And at a similar time, this was around early 1900s, similar time to them erecting the fence, the government introduced a policy to separate mixed race Aboriginal children from their family, put them into settlements to assimilate into white society. And when I was backpacking in Australia, when I broke my ankle, and I read loads of books and watched lots of films, and one of them was a rabbit-proof fence. And there was a story of these 3 young Aboriginal girls in 1931 who were taken from their family, placed in the settlement 1,000 miles away from their home, and they escaped and walked all the way home with no shoes and no provisions and no GPS. And they were aged between 8 and 13. So when I moved back home after my dad died, this story kind of stuck with me when I was struggling, because I kept comparing what I was enduring to what they endured, and felt guilty when I was feeling sorry for myself. So eventually I wanted to return to pay homage to their journey.
So this was, you're in Australia, you're traveling, and you read the book, but then actually taking up the challenge of the adventure to walk along the fence, which I think you journeyed about 1,500 miles, kind of self-supported. How long did it take for you between reading the book to actually taking up the challenge and committing to doing that? Was that period, and then how did you prepare for it? Because I think I'm right in saying that nobody else had, as far as you're aware, had ever done this before.
Yeah, 8 years it took me, I think, but it wasn't necessarily I was dying to do it each of those 8 years. I think from reading a book to doing it was 8 years, and then the last 5 of those years, I think it's from each adventure I did made me more confident, and not more confident necessarily, but made me aware that the world outside isn't as dangerous as we are implied it is. And so for the last 5 years, each summer in England, because you had to do it in English summer, Australian winter, it was always in my mind, I really want to do this, I really want to do this, but I just didn't know if it was possible. So then when I did eventually do it, I still didn't know if it was possible, but I just thought I'll just go and work it out. So I did. So
how do you prepare for kind of a solo expedition in the Australian outback? What skills? Because you assume that you've got to learn how to cook and feed yourself and kind of find water. And how do you go about preparing for that type of thing? And had you got any experience of doing that before?
The cooking's the easy bit. I think when you go on a long adventure, you're doing it for the adventure. You're doing it for it wasn't the challenge to test myself. It was more, I wanted to retrace their footsteps. So I was aware that I had to do anything I could to get there. So if that meant not having fresh bread every day, I'm not fussy with food anyway. So food for me was the easy bit. It was just dry food. And I would have a funny diet for 3 months. And I did a survival course, an outback survival course, which I probably would have known everything that they taught me, most things, but sometimes you need to be taught common sense. Water was my biggest worry. But then from doing the survival course, Bob Cooper advised me to call up all the homesteads that I would pass. So because the fence was erected to keep rabbits out of pastoral land, there were 6 farms or homesteads along the fence. So I called them up, and that was really great because then they were aware of my presence, what I was doing, and could keep an eye out if something went wrong. And they also invited me to stay with them, and which was nice and humbling.
So I think I'm right in saying that Bob Cooper is your survival expert guru who you had a bit of a training session with before you went out, and you kind of went on one of his survival courses, and he kind of went through all of the things that you need to do to kind of prepare yourself. But from thinking about that food and kind of sustenance and everything, and the logistics which you allude to, what about the mental side? Because assume you're going out there alone, there's no people, and it's a long journey that hasn't been effectively charted before, or perhaps not charted since the 3 girls had done the journey themselves in the 1930s. So how do you equip yourself mentally for that kind of challenge, and also that isolation that you're going to be putting yourself into?
Well, that was fine. I'm good isolated because because to me, I suppose in the work world, people get promoted and work towards getting promoted. Whereas for me, the adventures are sort of me working towards a promotion for myself, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. You're learning new skills. And like I said, when I cycled to Africa, I organised the journey, but I always felt like I was tagging along on someone else's trip because the boys were faster. So I'd always be at the back. So whenever we'd cycle through a new town, the fun bit is in navigating and working out where to go, and I was always sort of following. So I quite liked the isolating and working things out and map reading, and there was so much entertainment for me to work out the next bit of the journey, reading the book to follow my footsteps along with where they were at the time, watching the stars, picking out southern hemisphere constellations. The isolation was great. I liked it.
And did you experience any dark moments where you were, the emotion perhaps overcame you of being like, if you got lost, if you can't find, the water supplies, or I don't know if anybody at the homestead maybe wasn't in, were there times when you just faced some battles where you thought, I can't do this, and obviously we're here today, so you must have overcome them, but how did you accomplish, or how did you overcome maybe some of those moments at the time when you were faced with them?
Yeah, I did. I got really lost at one time. And actually, before I set off, I did a practice walk with a protest. It was a protest walk in the area that I'd be finishing. So I wanted to see if I could walk in the terrain. And they were doing an anti-uranium walk. There's one girl there who just didn't like me. And I think she didn't like the fact that I was walking a rubber-proof fence. And I thought about it, and she hadn't. I don't know. But she was a bit bullyish, and when we were all saying goodbye and hugging each other, she's like, "Oh, I don't want to hug you. I don't want to be your friend. But I just want to see how you get on, if you know what I mean." So she freaked me out a little bit, but I forgot about her. But then when I got lost, I thought, "Oh God, is she going to rock up?" And then another guy texted a friend who was in the SAS and said, "What the hell is your friend doing? This is ridiculous. It's so stupid." So I thought about him, and I was really worried about being that pommy chick, white chick, being rescued. But then I remembered Bob Cooper saying, number one rule in survival is to not panic. So I was panicking, and then read my maps and saw there's a track 10 kilometers to the west. So came out of the bush because I couldn't get through. The bush was so overgrown, and the fence was redundant in the 1950s, so it hadn't been used for 60, 70 years or more. And so I found my way again, and from having that experience made me more confident and stronger in knowing that actually if I can get through that, if I can fight those demons of those, it was like a carousel of people saying you can't do this, and still proceed forward, then I could generally, hopefully, make it to the end. That was a time that made me think, "Oh, I've got this." Because before, I was taking each day as it came.
Now, I've heard you describe sort of your love of the fence as almost being like a boyfriend, like a relationship, that you actually fell in love with the fence, which obviously is an inanimate object.
Yeah.
And I've heard you talk about that in terms of the subsequent book that you're writing about the adventure, and kind of feeling an affinity for that kind of writing process and reliving that journey, I imagine. But what is it that the core components of an adventure that give you that special connection?
To the fence?
Well, just in the sense that you're on this journey and you feel this love. Is that coming from you being there in the moment, you remembering reading that book at a time that your father passed away, a combination of all of those things, or is it you being proud of yourself? Where does that love come from, or is it just like I love this wire and wood? What is it that makes that connection?
I think many things, really. I think the fact that it was a random book that I picked up. We read books all the time. Well, some people do. And it was just a very much random book that was a moving story, but that was it. And then the proximity of timing with losing my dad, and then that book became more of a beacon of inspiration rather than just now a random book. And I think as I did all these adventures, I became quite frustrated with how women men and women are seen in the adventure world. Like men will explore ice caps or do polar expeditions or climb mountains, and even when I did Ironman, as were women, but when I did Ironman, all these nutrition brands are thrown at you, and sport gear and etc., just to do an event for one day voluntarily, and we're like putting our blood, sweat and tears for it, but just for one day. Even at the training, you train a lot for that, but the girls did it all with nothing. So I was in awe of them for many years, thinking, God, they scaled 1,000 miles with no shoes or food or maps or anything, and it was pure because they had to. They were fleeing somewhere to get home, so it wasn't an adventure for them, it was a necessity. So number one, they inspired me for so many years, and I always thought of them. And then when I was in their footsteps, so I had never had a moment like it where I'd been so inspired that I wanted to mimic or retrace someone, and been walking in their actual footsteps. It was really every day when I was on my own, I'd think about, oh, where would they have slept, or seen little caves or holes and thought, oh, would they have tucked in there? And then when I was taken in by their family, it was everything worked out.
And when was it that you became aware that there was, that you could connect with the family? Had you tried to reach out to them first and foremost?
Yeah. So when I got to Australia and did this anti-uranium walk, I'd heard that their family, the girls' daughters, were nearby. So I went to a town to go and find them, but there'd been a funeral on, so they went there. So I went to another town to wait for their bus to pass this town, Newman. And then I made a contact who knew them, so she introduced me to them, and I asked for their permission to walk the fence, because that was my biggest worry. Their story had inspired me, but I'm some white chick from England, and we were part of the problem with why they were taken. So I didn't want to insult them culturally. And then, so I stayed in touch with them and kept tabs with them. And then they didn't want to walk the fence, but Molly's daughter, who lived in another town where I was walking into, Jigalong, I managed to get in contact with her by staying in touch with the other girls, and she took me in.
And so she joined you for the final leg.
Yeah.
And then you became aware that in fact Daisy, one of the original three girls, was still alive.
Yeah.
So did you know that? Were you aware that she was still alive? And how did you find that out and ultimately meet her?
Yeah, I did know, because when I did my research from here, I made friends with someone who did Australian art. She'd had an exhibition from Carmamilli, which is the area where they're from. And so I went and met her, and she called up a contact, and she was with Daisy's daughter. So I did know she was alive, but she was very old. She was 96. And then when I did the protest walk, that girl who didn't like me told me that she'd passed away, which I hadn't heard of it, so I wasn't sure if she had or not, but she was doing it to be nasty, which I thought was even more nasty. So I didn't know, and because she was so old, anything could have happened. And it took me 3 months to walk. And then when I got to Jigalong, Maria said, "Oh, Daisy is still alive. Would you like to meet her?" So I was like, "Oh my gosh, yes." It was really wonderful.
And what was that moment like? You kind of come to the end of the challenge, and here's one of your heroes there. Can you describe what that moment felt like?
Yeah. So I had, just randomly there, the book which I read. This is the same one that I read about 4 times whilst walking the fence, and I had it in my bag. And then on her mantelpiece was this cover in a frame. So it was just a funny. I mean, I was no one really to their story, but she was so ill that she couldn't really communicate, but her grandson was there and told her. So I just wanted her to know that their story was so inspiring and helped me through a difficult time. And it was kind of nice to see that I had the book in my pocket and she had it on the mantelpiece. So it was just an incredible story. And I was surprised that I think a lot of people in Australia know about it, but it's thanks to a film being made that made it more popular. But yeah, just a very inspiring story.
Absolutely. Well, as is yours, retracing the footsteps and becoming, I guess as far as you're aware, the first person to ever do so. That's no mean feat. That's an incredible challenge. And how long was the journey in itself? How long did that whole experience take?
3 months of 1,000 miles.
And were you giving yourself a time limit? Did you set, I'm going to be at this point by this time, or were you going with the flow a little bit?
Roughly, not a time limit, but I did have, I think I had a 6 months Australian visa, and I'd already spent a month in Perth. But I suppose I kind of I can't even remember. It's 1,000 miles, so you cover 10 to 20 miles a day. I knew I'd be there within the time limit. But also it was I've always freelanced since in my professional life, and I procrastinate a lot because it's hard sometimes, as a self-starter. Whereas I like the metaphor really with these adventures or long walks. I find it meditative because if you don't move, you literally don't move. So it kind of inspired me to keep going, to know that they were going, and you physically you're aware of standing still, being stuck, or moving forward.
And with nobody having done it before, obviously you'll have maps and things with you, but you already mentioned, getting lost happened. You must have to factor in a little bit of leeway for, maybe taking some diversions, because it's not necessarily just following a straight line. The fence is there sometimes and then it disappears.
Yeah, it is as straightforward as following a straight line if the fence was there, but sometimes it was pulled down because it was redundant in the 50s, and other times the bush had overgrown. So yeah, it did get hairy in some places, but that made it fun, because actually if it was following the fence, then it would have been more straightforward.
And I know that the trolley that you took with you named after your dear old dad, Trevor.
Yeah.
So how important was that for you in kind of, I suppose, having a piece of your dad with you along that journey?
No, it was very accidental. I had this trolley that I saw a girl, she'd done a walk. I can't remember where specifically, but she walked a bit of Australia, or quite a lot of Australia, but a different part, but through the outback as well. And she had this trolley. So I was like, well, I could have made my own. I could have arrived in Australia and made my own, but I didn't know anyone. And it's hard to rely on people that you don't know. And it could have cost quite a lot, ended up costing quite a lot, or broken or whatever. So I knew she'd use this. So I took this one. And then I was preparing it the night before I was going. And then I was packing him up. And I thought, I should name him. And I had some tape. So I just thought, it's a trolley. I like alliteration. And then I was like, Trevor. Yeah, sure. So it was quite accidental. And I'm really glad I named him because I was never on my own, because I had him. So I had two inanimate objects, the trolley and the fence.
And you come to the end of this journey, and then it leads straight on to the next one. So you, I think, originally had plans to circumnavigate Australia kind of when you were traveling in Australia. And you're at the end of the walking the rabbit-proof fence, completing this incredible journey. And obviously, that has this personal connection with you and your heroes, and meeting one of them. And then the next thing, you're reinvigorating the challenge of circumnavigating the country, but by hitchhiking. So
yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how that all came together?
Yeah, so when I got to Jigalong and I was going to see Daisy, there was no public transport. I managed to hitch a ride with a mechanic who was working in the school, back out to Newman. And then from Newman up to Port Hedland, which is where Daisy was, there again was no transport. So I had to hitch. So I went to the service station and managed to get a lift with this $1 million red, shiny, brand new crane truck. And he gave me a lift and up to Port Hedland. And it was really endearing because I suppose on my way walking, I went up the Northwestern Highway, the Great Western Highway, and I saw these big road trains and truckies and synonymous with, I don't know, like I thought they'd be chauvinistic or potty-mouthed or racist. And this guy was lovely, and he had a bad experience with his wife left him and squirreled all his money away and It was not, he was really sad and heartbroken. And then he said one day he was in a shop and met his first ever girlfriend, his high school sweetheart. And they stayed in touch, and then they got together and they were about to go on their first holiday on a cruise together. So I really enjoyed the experience of talking to him. So after he wished me luck and I told him all about the Rabbit Proof Fence Girls, I was like, oh my God, what an incredible story. So when I met Daisy, I was in a state of euphoria, sat on the curb, I didn't know what to do, but I didn't want to fly back to Perth in 60 minutes when it had taken me 3 months to walk. So I hitchhiked with 5 trucks. And they were wonderful, all wanted to help get me back to Perth. If they couldn't get me all the way, they'd get on the blowers or they'd go into a service station and ask around, and they were just really kind and gentlemanly. And so when I was in Perth, I was waiting for my friend to pick me up, and I was like, I always wanted to circumnavigate Australia. I want to see my friends, so I will do it with trucks. So I did.
And so literally the traditional sense of, you're standing at the side of the road, you've got your thumb out and you're waiting for somebody to come along.
No, not quite like that. So they have, because they've got such long, big open roads in Australia, sometimes there's nothing for 700 kilometres. They've got these truck stops or service stations out in the middle of nowhere. And so trucks often, fill up there, always stop and fill up there. And so I'd go to them and suss them out. I turned it into a project, even though I haven't done anything with it. So I told them I was doing a photography project, and they all had to have their photo taken before I got in the car. And I did a little video and got them to introduce themselves.
And is that as an element of safety, so that you
a little bit
captured them, and because it is an incredibly brave thing to do, especially I suppose as a single female traveller, putting yourself in that environment with a complete stranger. A lot of people will be very risk adverse and wouldn't even consider doing that. So how much of an element were you kind of building a safety net in for yourself?
Well, it was the point of the project was to dispel people's misconceptions of them. So before getting in the car, I wouldn't have got in if I didn't trust them anyway. But the photos was more to cover my back for if anything did happen, then people would be like, why is she being so stupid? So it was more, I never really did think any of them would do anything. It was more to just make them aware and me aware that I've got it covered. And I also grabbed their phone, followed my Facebook page, and uploaded my post to theirs. So everyone knew where I was. And actually, by the time I was getting round to the other side to say Cairns or Townsville, all the truckies had heard about me because I joined all these truckie Facebook groups. And I had one guy come up to me and say, oh, you're that truckie girl. Sorry, I can't give you a lift, because I'd been stuck in one spot for 3 days because I think there was a holiday and no one was moving north. And he said, but I can give you a bag of grapes. So he gave me a bag of grapes. But it was really funny. It was a really wonderful adventure too.
And this is something that the national news got hold of as well, right? They interviewed you too. So I guess there's an extra safety net there in the fact that the country was aware that here's Lindsey Cole trucking around Australia. How does that come about? How does a news crew get out to you when you're perhaps in the middle of nowhere?
I don't know. I was a bit gutted actually, because with the rabbit-proof fence story, it's such an incredible story, and I thought it was inspiring, people hearing that someone from England wanted to come all the way to retrace their journey because they were so inspired by it. But then the media weren't really particularly interested. I don't know if it's because it was so sensitive. And then this random truckie story, because it's funny and lighthearted, and it was great. But what was wonderful was that I was able to tell. I had so much time to talk to them. I think my shortest journey was 2 hours, but my longest was 3 days. And often I had to sleep in the truck with them. So often I had a lot of time with them. So I'd tell them all about the rabbit-proof fence, and they were all on side of it. They all thought it was harrowing and shameful. So it was really quite nice educating them about part of their history.
And was it a story that you found that they weren't aware of, that they hadn't been aware that part of their history had existed? Were you almost educating them on some kind of national history?
Yeah, some of them didn't know, because I think the film came out in 2004. And then I think maybe a few years after that, it was played in some schools. So not all schools. And so I think they might have heard of it, maybe, but not really know the ins and outs. And and one guy actually was part of the stolen generation. There was one truckie, my final truckie actually, which is again quite an uncanny moment. The guy so I started in Darwin, went all the way around to Darwin, and then truckies started messaging me saying, if you ever need lifts from here to here, then let me know. And I needed to get to Alice Springs, so I got a lift to Alice Springs. And then after I'd done my thing in Alice Springs, I thought I might as well carry on to Sydney. And my final truckie from Melbourne to Sydney, when I told him about the journey, he had been forcibly removed when he was a kid and placed in a settlement. So it was quite an inspiring truckie to finish off my journey.
So in a couple of different ways, it really did sort of come full circle. You literally circled around the country, and you met somebody that had, and so was he aware of Molly, Daisy, and Gracie's story himself?
Yes.
Wow, what a fantastic kind of note to end on. And so you've been on these incredible adventures in different parts of the world, but I know the UK certainly more and more in recent years has become a playground for your adventures as well. And you last year were dipping around Britain. For those of us that don't know what dipping means, could you explain a little bit more about that journey and your adventures in open water swimming?
Sure. So I came back from Australia via Bali. I cut my hand on a piece of plastic whilst diving out in Indonesia, and wanted to do something about it. I was on the lookout for my next adventure. So I thought I would swim the length of the River Thames as a mermaid to highlight how we're choking our mermaids and creatures of plastic. And it took up 22 days, 120 miles. And lots of people just appeared to join me, unplanned. They hadn't messaged, they just rocked up, which was really moving because it was really cold. It was November, 6 degrees in the water. And then after this journey, I started receiving messages from people all over the country saying, we just saw what you did. If you're ever in Tynemouth, or if you're ever in the Lake District in Cumbria, if you're ever in Devon, come and join us. You're more than welcome. Always a warm bed, and I'm always on the lookout for a warm bed. And then this event popped up in March in Scotland, the Scottish Cold Water Swimming Championships. So I thought I'd cycle from Devon all the way up there, connecting with all these people along the way. So I bookended my day with a swim in the morning, and then in the evening, wherever I was able to cycle to. And I got to Scotland. It took me 2 weeks to get there, and I was only in Scotland for 2 days. I was like, wow, it took me 2 weeks to get here. It was such a shame to go straight back. I had a lift back down south. I wasn't living anywhere at the time. I was just crashing with mates. And so I thought I'll just carry on. So it was a real gamble, because I was gambling on the kindness of swimmers, joining more swimmers, but it just worked. And when my lift left, I panicked, because I was like, I don't know where I'm going, north, south, east or west. What do I do? And then my phone pinged, and it was a friend saying, oh, I've just seen you in Scotland. We're in Mallaig. Always welcome. So I was like, boom. So I cycled to Mallaig, then went to Skye, Harris, posed with a bottle of Harris gin. Someone messaged me to say, oh, we've got gin in Orkney too, come here. So I went to Orkney, and because I was in Orkney, I went to Shetland. And then still wasn't ready to finish when I went to the most northern point of Shetland. So I was like, I'll cycle back down south, but I'll give myself an end goal. So I decided on Scilly, and we've randomly meandered all the way back down, but swimmers were my compass. So it was really a really heartwarming journey. And I went to all these places in Britain that I'd never been before.
Amazing. And so when you're dipping, when you're going for a swim, what does that entail? Are you doing a set distance? Are you literally just kind of jumping in and out of the water? Is it different from time to time?
It's just whatever, really. So it's sort of winter swimming, I suppose, and it's very cold in winter. So it's more, I do it personally for the sensation. It makes me feel good, energized, invigorating. And I always get my head underwater, and it makes me squeal and scream. So it can be anything from 30 seconds to 10 minutes bobbing. I love long distance swimming, but I wouldn't do it in winter, really. And so it's just running in with someone I've just met, holding their hand, jumping in and bobbing about, and then getting out, eating cake and talking about how to save the world.
And so in your mermaid journey, if we go back to that for a second, why did you choose mermaid? You could have just swam the length of the Thames normally, or I don't know, you could be dressed as a fish, or what was it specific to being a mermaid that you thought would kind of add something to that adventure?
Because when I cut my hand, I was free diving, and it became a new hobby. So I was looking on Instagram of all these free divers, and some of them donned a mermaid tail. So I was like, that would be great. And I hoped that, I don't like to preach. I don't think people listen when you preach. So I hoped that if I was a mermaid, it would make people think, there's a mermaid in the water, and, like a human. And if we put litter in, it will choke her. So to speak. But I called it urban mermaid because I think when people are by the coast or by a river or a loch or whatever, they have an innate ability to care for it. But when you're in urban areas, you feel like you're so far from the sea that, if you drop your litter or if you stuff a bin and it's still full, then they don't think, if that litter gets out and blows into the drain, it gets into the sea because they're so far. So it's more to make people in urban areas aware that their actions can still harm the oceans.
Thinking about those two challenges kind of in connection to each other, you're mermaiding along the Thames and you're collecting plastic as you go, and when you're out in the open water, did you see evidence of plastic pollution in these kind of remote areas as you're dipping in different parts of the country? Was that quite visible for you to see that?
Yeah. Because when people walk their dogs out in the meadows, so the Thames starts in Thames Head in Gloucestershire, sorry, and it's just green meadows for a lot of the way. But when people walk their dogs, wrappers might spill out their pocket, but often it was the cities that were worse. But the point is when it reaches the Thames mouth down in Essex, then it goes out into sea, and once it's in the sea, that's sort of game over, really. But it's more and in say places like Oxford or Reading, people might have had a picnic and just, I don't know, the wind might blow the litter into the river, or they might just dump it anyway. But we found tons. We had a sculpture. My friend canoed, and she made a sculpture made out of recycled bottles, and it was 6 foot high. It was a mermaid sculpture, and we stuffed what we found in her, and we could have done it 10 times over.
And what did you do with what you found? Were you were people collecting it from you at the end of each day? Did you take it with you for the whole journey?
Yeah, I took it with us for the whole journey. We were only a 2-man team. I always do stuff like on my own, because support costs, or it costs their time. And if you value their time, you want to sort of pay them. And I don't earn much at all. And so it was just us two, really. So we kept it and stuffed her, the mermaid. We were going to do a green. We were invited to a green festival to show her off, but it didn't happen. So she's now still in Teddington in London, at my friend's auntie's garden.
So obviously, the point is that when the plastic pollution, it starts from these inland waterways, and it has and then is taken out to the sea. But when you were dipping in, Shetland, for example, or in the far kind of reaches of different parts of Britain, where you would expect there to be less pollution, and maybe there was. Did you still see elements of that waste when
Shetland was bad, actually, because I don't imagine it was the people, because I was on a remote island. Shetland's made out of tons of islands, and I was on the second most north island. And as I walked around the coast, all this litter washed up, often broken down. So I think once it's out at sea, it washes up on an island. But I was flabbergasted by Shetland's coastline. And people they made more effort to litter pick. They did weekly collections, but it still appears. But yeah, everywhere is. But I'm a Surfers Against Sewage rep now, and I was made aware of their work when I swam the Thames, because I'd passed somewhere like Maidenhead and Windsor, and they were really pretty decent and clean. But it didn't mean that general people litter less. I think it meant that more people cared for their part of the river and would clean it.
What strikes me is that when you talk about your adventures and what you've done in terms of whether it's triathlon, and I know you've done an Ironman, and walking the fence, and cycling to South Africa, and you're swimming the Thames, and you're cycling around Britain and swimming around Britain. It's all self-propelled motion. It's you getting yourself to these places and having these incredible experiences. How much of a conscious thought is that when you consider what you're doing with your adventures, and how much of that relates to, I suppose, your own environmental principles and morals?
I think my environmental morals have come from enjoying exploring and seeing these incredible parts of the world, and I suppose payment to it is caring for it, and money comes into it. So I've always been on a really little budget, so vehicles cost. So when I walked the rabbit-proof fence, I think support did come into it, but it would be so costly, and it would take. It's a different journey when you've got support. So I watched a film recently called Bait. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No.
It's made on a super something film, like that close-up box film. And it won, I think it won a BAFTA or won awards anyway. And it was done on a really tight budget. And he said in an interview, because they're on a budget, every shot was thought about and conscious. And it's sort of similar when you're on a budget on a journey. You kind of don't waste the days, you don't waste a penny. It's all sort of thought about and processed. I think if you hop in a car to get to places, sometimes it's easy, isn't it? It's not. when you have to propel yourself to get there, it's real.
It's more rewarding, right?
Rewarding, yeah.
You've got yourself there. You're kind of there's an element of self-satisfaction, I think, within that.
Yeah.
And there's a quote.
Don't get me wrong, I do like riding in cars.
Well, there is a quote of yours which sort of stood out to me from when you were in Shetland, and I think it's from one of the little kind of films that you did, or an interview that you did as part of that journey, where you say if you couldn't see the telegraph poles, you wouldn't know what year you were in, which is quite a beautiful sort of thought, in the sense of...
Yeah, I forgot I said that. Shetland is incredible. And the point of my journey last year is actually one of my favourite journeys, because it was accidental. It never meant to be an adventure. I was meant to be going down to Totnes to see if I want to live there and finish writing this book. And it all happened accidentally, which is how the best adventures happen. But I was... debating whether to go to Orkney and Shetland just because it was so far away, and I obviously wasn't earning anything. I teach English online, so I could do 1 or 2 a week or a few lessons, so it was pocket money. But then I was up in northern Scotland. I was up near Aberdeen, and I weighed up my options, and I saw that if I was to come back to Shetland another year, if I fancied, it would cost something like 700 quid to fly from London and take 2 days or something, or a day and a half. And I was already in the area, and I managed to blag a free ferry. So I was like, well, I'd be stupid not to go. And I'm so grateful that I did, because it was just so eye-opening and awe-inspiring. There's no trees. People tell you there's no trees, but until you go to a place with no trees, you can't perceive what a place is like without any trees. So windy and raw and wild, and the Atlantic crashes on this big cliff, and it looked like a giant glass of gin and tonic. It was aquamarine, the water, and the froth was brilliant white. It looked like an avalanche crashing down the rocks. It was March anyway. I like traveling places in March because it's not very busy, so it wasn't busy at all. But it was, and there was seals right on the coastline, and anywhere you are, you're about 2 or 3 miles far from the maximum from the coast. It's just an incredible place. And there's remnants on the Northern Ireland, and maybe others, of these huts that people used to live in back in the days before the clearances. I didn't even know about the clearances. And so...
And what are the clearances for those of us that don't know?
Yeah, I don't know too much, but I don't know the year it was, but a guy called Sutherland, an English guy, he saw the value of land, sheep were more valuable in land than humans, so he just cleared the humans off the land, and whether they had somewhere else to go or not, they were pushed off. And it happened on the Highlands as well, at Hebrides, Highlands, the Northern Highlands. I think quite a lot of them, because their experience with cattle or sheep or farming, I think, and subsistence farming, I think a lot of them might have gone to Patagonia in Argentina. So I think they did quite well out of it. But yeah, astonishing, because I didn't know any of this.
How much of a...
I don't know my facts on that, because I haven't read up on it just now.
That's no problem. You're not going to be quizzed on it. So
okay.
I suppose people can go on Google if they want to learn out a little bit more. So how much of a deeper sense of appreciation do you have for Britain as an adventure destination, from, having spent time traveling in different parts of the world and doing things in different parts of the, different continents, and, quite incredible challenges. Do you have more of a sense of appreciation for what we have now on our own doorstep?
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose I've spent a lot of time in England, and I'm not a big fan of cycling around the Midlands. It's just roads and industrial, and I like long distance cycling, as in touring, like to get from place to place. That's my type of cycling. And when you have to go through that mess of roads, it just makes me feel queasy. So once you're out of that, there's so many places to get to. And Northumberland I've never been to, and it's stunning. And Scotland, I really, really fell in love with Scotland. It just literally took my breath away. And there's, I suppose, adventure anywhere if you give yourself the time. And there's so many nooks and crannies in Britain that are wonderful to discover. As for anyone living in any part of the world, discovering your doorstep is wonderful. Because when I left school or uni, all I wanted to do was go to far-flung places. I hadn't never been to Scotland before. When I did Land's End to John O'Groats, so I saw Scotland quickly then. But all I wanted to do was go to far exotic places or fun place, Africa or South America, or Australia, Asia. I wasn't interested in Britain. So it's kind of nice now, sort of trying to settle down here and discovering, wow, Britain's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's well, certainly when you talk about some of the beaches up in the northeast there, I know when I was growing up, having family connections over there, places like Bamborough and Beadnell, the beaches are phenomenal, and they're quite often deserted, and it just feels that unless you're from that area and that locality, they're a real hidden treasure. So there are some beautiful and stunning places that you can get out to, and you don't have to jump on a plane and travel too far to get to them. Yeah,
absolutely.
So when it comes to adventure, we live now, maybe it's changed a bit since perhaps when we first met in Canada. I know I had a regular camera where you had to get the film processed, but now we're in this Instagram kind of era. How important is that in your considerations of what you do with adventure? Do you feel the need and maybe the social pressures to fuel your channels by, okay, I need to do another adventure now because I've got to do an Instagram post? Or is that just kind of a byproduct of, no, the adventure comes first and the social content is a complement?
I had a big epiphany about this when I was walking around River Thames, because I wanted to make a film. I used to work in TV and film, and so I was going to make a film about it. I had this Canon 5D that I got on Gumtree for a few £100. And so it was a big lump of a thing and a couple of lenses. And I'm really into images and photography. And I would be filming. It's hard filming yourself because you've got to set it up on a tripod, take it out of its case, set it up on a tripod, run back, walk past, realize that you're not in shot. So do it all again. And you're really reduced to your battery life as well. So you've got to be really cautious. And then the times when it was really difficult, I actually just used this a lot to talk, and I found that really helpful. It was like therapy when something happened, talking to this. So I was like, that's nice.
This being your phone, just for those that aren't watching on YouTube.
Yeah. But the 5D would have made nicer images, but by setting it up, you're just losing the emotion. And so thinking about that, I was like, what am I doing this for? Like a film or doing it? And I really wanted to do the adventure. So it was a good learning thing for me because it was the most incredible journey I've ever done. And I think it was because it happens organically and I didn't let anything interfere. Whereas if I was focusing on a film, I would have kind of, you might have to set things up or big things up, or I don't know, it wouldn't have been so true. But I like writing, so when I get a nice picture or something, because you have to take images when you're away, or it's still part of it, and you want to remember them. But I like writing, so I like social media for if I feel something or something happened or there's a nice anecdote, I use it for that. Because I think you can get caught up with the likes and the followers, but actually they don't really mean anything, really, in the grand scheme of things. It's good though if you want to get clothing or brands, they can see what you do, and that's part of your job. But as far as it goes,
And obviously storytelling is quite a big part of your adventures. You've got a lot of themes going on within each one. Roller skating to Bude in a nude suit, because it rhymed, and there's kind of an angle there. And then when you're running to Manchester and you're playing a ukulele and you're singing songs and going on the radio, it's kind of like a theme. Is that for you as a motivator? Is it for kind of attracting maybe some press and media attention to your adventures? What's the kind of, I guess, thought process behind some of those storytelling initiatives?
More just for me, for entertainment, for me to give. I think running from A to B would be boring if you give yourself, because I ran from London to Bristol because a friend was doing the Bristol Half Marathon and I had a week off. So I was like, I'll run to you and do it with you. And so I was like, I can run. And I did it in 3 days or something, or 2.5 days. And so I was like, wow, I can run 40 miles a day. And I was like, I could learn a skill in that time of running 8 hours a day. So next time I did something, I learned to play the ukulele, listen to songs and learned to play the ukulele in the evening, and then the radio turned it into a segment, and that was all accidental. I didn't get any media coverage apart from the radio, but to Bude in a nude was just for fun, and a friend had just lost his son, so I raised money for him. But it's just my own entertainment, really, and knowing that I can. And
so with the Rabbit Proof Fence, that was a book that really inspired you. I know that you're working on your own book. How is that coming along, and how are you finding kind of that whole process of getting, your adventures together? And is it about all the adventures, or is it about one in particular?
Well, it's tricky. So this one, the Rabbit Proof Fence, was just me, and it's emotional because it's about losing my dad and how I became acquainted with the story. And then I did this journey last year, which is very accidental, swimming with strangers. And it brought so much joy. And I was writing inadvertently every day about it from Instagram. So I think I might veer towards doing that one first and then go back to that one. But I'm also writing a kid's book about a mermaid who found a cow, because when I mermaided the Thames, I rescued a cow.
Which is something I want to ask you about as well, because you're swimming along, you're mermaiding along, and you see what you think is a kind of plastic bag, and you quickly realise that it's actually a cow has fallen into the Thames. How did you help the cow to kind of, how did you rescue the cow? And
yeah, it doesn't sound as exciting as it was, but we called the police and the RSPCA, and then 6 firemen came along and hauled her out, and she's on a Oxfordshire side, and she's actually from Gloucestershire, so they got her to swim across the river, and she's reunited with her 2 calves and a vet. She was seen by a vet. But the next day, a journalist asked us in Oxford what had we found in the river. So we said we found balls, cricket bats, dinghies and mattresses and a cow. And then it was on page 3 of the Sun.
And what I really like about this story is that there was a school or a teacher got in touch with you and turned it into a play. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, that's what it frustrated me at the time, actually, because I'd called all these radio stations to say what I was doing, and they weren't interested. And I said, I'll pass your area on these dates, and no one was particularly interested.
Because you're trying to shine a spotlight on this plastic problem, and you're trying to get people mobilised into, there's a call to action here, isn't there, for people to act more responsibly when it comes to, littering or litter picking, or, having an awareness of their own environments.
Exactly. And no mermaid had swum the Thames before, but I thought that would have been enough, really, because it's hard work as well. And then we found a cow, and then the whole country knew it. Once it was in the Sun, I think Chris Evans emailed, and Radio 2 emailed, and Radio 5 emailed, and then the local radios all wanted to be involved and interested, and my phone just didn't stop ringing. So I was like, now they all want it, but before no one was interested. And I didn't have time, actually, because I was swimming, obviously.
So has this play that the school have done around your story in rescuing the cow, has this come to fruition? Is it something that you've seen?
Yeah,
have you been invited along to it?
Yeah, they invited me along. It was really lovely in Wembley last summer. And it was really, really endearing. It was really, really moving. I was a bit blown away when I received the message. I said, yeah, of course. And then they invited me 2 months later.
So did you have a kid playing you as the mermaid?
I think they had a couple of mermaids, yeah.
And obviously school talks are something that you do, and that you share your stories with kids to help to inspire them. And what are some of the funniest questions that kids have asked you when you've been along to the schools doing assemblies?
I think the youngest ones ask the best ones, like but do mermaids pee? Or I think I was talking about Australia, and one kid kept asking questions like, oh, do they have giraffes? Do they have elephants? Do they have all the animals that are in Africa but not Australia? And they're just really endearing. And do mermaids get on with sharks?
With all these incredible adventures that you've done, there's a quote that you have on your website which I really like, Mark Twain quote, which is paraphrases, in 20 years time when you look back you will regret the things that you haven't done rather than the things that you have done. So where do you want to be sort of in 20 years time when you look back, and how do you think that you'll reflect on the adventures that you've done to date and the adventures that you've got yet to come?
Yeah, I like that quote because many of my friends from home have very hard established jobs like teachers or healthcare. And sometimes I'm like, oh God, because I didn't intend to be an adventurer. I just started doing adventures, and then you eventually make a career out of it, albeit not make much money out of it. So sometimes when I do something or have an idea for something, I have this burning desire to do it, and I can't think of anything else but doing it. And then I think, oh, is it narcissistic, or how does it change the world, or am I wasting time? But actually, I get such a kick and a buzz out of it. And you meet wonderful people by doing some of these things. So I now have a network of other adventure type people, and we help inspire each other. So I think I remember when I was about to do the trucks thing, I thought, God, I won't lose sleep when I'm an old person by not doing it. But I've actually got by my desk here a certificate. They have certificates for traversing from Darwin down to Adelaide, because it's a long, long road. And I was like, not only have I done that, but I've done all of that. And you can tip the thingy. So it's just, we all have different lives, and I think you won't ever regret doing something, but you might not regret doing that thing, but it just makes you have more of a colourful life and more things to talk about in the old people home.
Absolutely. And just to kind of wrap things up, a quote of yours that I really like is that success relies on the kindness of strangers. What are some of the kindness or kind things that strangers have done for you when you've been on your adventures, and what are some of those moments and kind of smaller moments that maybe don't get shared and talked about as much, that you've been quite overwhelmed by?
Yeah, but there's too many. There's far too many. But one that just popped into my head was when I roller skated to Bude in a nude suit, and I didn't really know much about roller skating, and they weren't blades, they were skates. And no, sorry, they were blades. But I didn't know about the bearings maybe wearing away, and they started sticking, because the roads down in Devon and Cornwall they're like emery boards, nail files, and so the wheels really working away and getting loads of muck in them. And we stayed with a friend's friend, never met this guy before, and I had to go to a skate shop to get new bearings, and the nearest one we were in North Devon, the nearest one was in Exeter, and he goes, I'll drive you there in the morning. I was like, oh no, don't absolutely, don't worry about it. He goes, no, I will. I was like, no, please, what time do you need to be at work? And he said, Lindsey, let me have my own adventure. So he just wanted to be a part of it. And I didn't want to burden him with this thing. So he drove us down to Exeter, then dropped us back where we were. And it took maybe 3 hours, 4 hours out of his day. But he just loved being a part of it because he had his own business and couldn't take the time out to roller skate in a nude suit. So he just took a little satisfaction by helping me out. So, but there's tons of stories of people being kind.
Which I think in the times that we find ourselves in at the moment is, an important message for, I think, everybody just to be kind to each other. And now more so than ever. But Lindsey, thank you so much for having the time to chat. It's been an absolute pleasure. Where can people find you if they want to go and find out more?
Sure. At Stumpy Cole on Instagram and lindseycole.co.uk for online.